This kind of sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? When is a game not a game? The answer not being when it's a jar. We've gotten into this odd thing where people are calling themselves game developers and are putting things up for sale and calling them games when they're not actually games, and calling these things not games actually gets some people mad. They want these games to be called games, but yet they hate them because there's nothing to do in them. There's games like Proteus or The Lost Valley where all you do is walk around, or Mountain where it's just a mountain floating in nothingness. But yet while there's people that want these things to be classified as games, they hate and criticize them for being bad games. But are they really games? Jim Sterling, one of my favorite YouTubers, has made a video about the subject. While I think he makes good points, I think there's a workaround. He has said that a video game is interacting with something through a user interface and getting visual feedback, and simplified that you make it do things. However, he didn't take into consideration of the definition of the word game. You see, the key components of a game are goals, rules, challenge, and interaction. Taking that into consideration, the logic of you make it do things actually falls apart because it's too broad a statement. When I make these videos, is that a game? I'm interacting with a user interface and getting visual feedback. I'm making After Effects do something, but it's not a game. It's not organized play. It's the opposite. It's work. That's the word we really need to look at. Game. Game is defined as organized play. There's rules, objectives, challenges, and structure to it. So something like The Lost Valley or Proteus are games where you just walk around and look at things. There's no objective. There's no structure, no rules, at least no obvious ones. Some say to call things like The Lost Valley, Proteus, or Mountain not video games does a disservice to the medium. However, I disagree. I think that including them with video games does a disservice to video games. It allows people to throw things up for sale, call them games when all you really do is walk around or look at something, which causes people to get angry as they now wasted their money on what they were told was a game, but it really isn't. It's false advertising to call it a game if there's no structured play. People will say that a game needs a fail state. However, a game doesn't need a fail state or a score to be a game. The Stanley Parable does have structured play without fail states. The goal and challenge of the game is to explore and find all the different endings. Changing one detail of the adventure gets a completely different conclusion to the story. But then there's things like Dear Esther and Everybody's Gone to Rapture, things that were critically acclaimed but have been challenged as not video games. Games where all you do is walk around and listen to some dialogue that explains the story. You listen to the music or atmospheric sounds and then it ends. You can even skip everything and head to where the end of the game is and be finished. The goals are to experience the story that the developers wanted to tell, but that's also the goal of a book. Just instead of turning pages and seeing the world with your mind's eye, you're allowed to roam in a 3D world. But I've seen people bash these games for being bad or boring games, which I do not think is fair. Granted, the people that think these games are bad have some credence to their claims, because what fun is a game where you walk around, look at some pretty scenery, and listen to some dialogue? And before someone's decided to go full retard and asks me in a furious rage if I expect all games to be some action jizzing Call of Duty shooter fest, I'm not expecting or saying that. The world isn't black and white. There are shades of gray. What I'm saying is, what if we gave these not games a different category away from games? Why not call them interactive art? If you think about it, it's more on par with that. Like the game that I'm playing now. It's visually good looking, the atmosphere is pretty well done, and the music works for it. But I'm not comfortable calling it a game. I'd be more comfortable calling it an interactive painting. If we did give these interactive art pieces their own category away from games, then we wouldn't be criticizing them as bad games or walking simulators or other derogatory or negative terms. If we didn't look at them as games but as something else, then we may have a deeper appreciation for what the creator was trying to make. Because these interactive art pieces are not bad. You're not falling through the floor, there's no bugs or glitches, it's very well programmed. The music in them is good and plays very well with the atmosphere. The presentation is great, but as a game, it's boring as hell because there's no challenge, no structure, no rules other than get to the end, and there's nothing stopping you other than your own desire to play something more stimulating. I do think that it is false advertising to label them as games because they don't fit the definition of what a game is. Just because it's interactive doesn't mean it's a game, but I think relabeling them into a different category might help in deflecting some of the negative criticism they get. And while the criticism isn't unfounded, it really isn't deserved either. But if we relabel them as something that isn't a game, then there's more possibilities that can open up up, especially with virtual reality coming. We may see a lot more of these types of interactive paintings. And it really does show the evolution of video games, to the point where some of these shouldn't be called games at all, but have their own thing outside of games so they can be better and properly appreciated.